Okay, we're back. So I got a really great round of applause, but I was so nervous that I turned off the camera. So I'm gonna I want to hear the applause again. I want everyone else to hear it. Okay. So we decided to have a really rather short follow-up with a few questions from my audience member, Ed, who's also the host of this lecture. Because to have another person weigh in just seems like a really important thing to do. So I'm gonna ask Ed, what do you have any questions, and did you agree or disagree with all or part of what was said? Or do you have any comments? Just what do you think? What's your response? Because I think it'll be helpful to have the audience have somebody's response.
Well, thank you for the lecture. I really enjoyed the reading. I enjoyed the introduction. I really have a strong appreciation of the thread that ties everything together that you brought up in the lecture. I have one or two questions just to understand some things. One question has to do with your reading of the Emerson. And every time in the Emerson essay that you used the word introvert, am I correct that you were substituting the word introvert for the word idealist or the word transcendentalist or some other word?
Yeah, I was. I'm trying to almost it might be a cheap form of argument to say that the words are just interchangeable. But I personally was so glad that I seemed like Emerson fit the bill so perfectly. He was so on the mark that I almost wanted to maybe overemphasize that point by substituting when Emerson would say either the transcendentalist or the idealist, because he says the first thing we have to say about these what are called new views here at the present time is that they are not new, but the various oldest of ideas. And then he says, so what is properly called transcendentalism among us is idealism. Idealism as it appears in 1842. But in 2013, my opinion, that the word idealism has evolved. So if you say idealism now, you don't mean what Emerson meant. Because in that time, the two opposing camps were the materialists, who were about the senses and the real world, and the idealists, who were like Platonic ideas, where Plato is more about what in Jungian psychology they would be called the archetypes. And these are sort of like they're abstract deities in a way. They're abstract ideas or forms, what Plato called the forms. And so when Emerson's saying idealist, he's talking about a philosophical school, which doesn't really have anything to do with like modern youth, in the streets or something like that. And so I felt like maybe I'll switch the words, occasionally, not every single case, but I'll switch the words sometimes, because nowadays I almost think like the word introvert is a better word than even idealism. So, and I could be wrong, and I'm not trying to. That's not the point I'm trying to make. I just want to anchor what I'm talking about to history, and I might be using a cheap mechanism to do it by switching the words without being, it might not be the most. I don't think it's cheap, but I just think that's my opinion. That's my take on it. I don't really. But yes.
Thanks. Actually, you answered an issue that was nagging at me, because I heard the word idealism in Emerson, and then I heard your substitution of introversion. And I was thinking to myself that maybe there's something deeper here than the question of introversion or extroversion or action. Maybe there is this deeper philosophical conflict between classical idealism and classical materialism. So, in a way, you sort of raised my own doubts about your imposition of extroversion and introversion.
Yeah.
I think, though, maybe some of my doubts have more to do with my not having the full understanding of what you're getting at with the first part, where you talked about introversive and extroversive aspects of the same person, or two different souls in the same person. So
Yeah.
I'd be interested in hearing more from you about that. But as I said, I certainly follow a really strong thread that ties through your whole lecture. I do have another question, Zach.
Yeah.
When you were talking about people who are introverted, you talked about, if I'm not mistaken, defending the castle. It was very interesting that you used the word castle, and I wanted to ask, where does that come from? Is that your word, or does it come from some of your sources, or your
it's my metaphor.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's a good metaphor. So I do stand by it. You know,
I was captured by it. You know, I kind of found it interesting.
Thanks. Castles, like, the thing that I think is interesting about castles is that when by the time the canon came along, this glorious symbol of a protected fortress in some ways became just a relic of the Middle Ages. And in Don Quixote, you know, he's like dressing up as a knight in shining armor, and he's going to go out, and it's the same kind of sentiment. It's like the human soul wants to be able to defend itself against the psychological forces that are attacking it. And in so many ways, the modern world is like the Bob Dylan song, "The times they are changing." You know, come gather around people wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept that soon you'll be sink like a stone. And so it's like, and you better start swimming, you know. So it's like that is like, in a way, to some extent, how the modern world assaults the natural castle that the introvert would like. I think a lot of introverts do yearn for a sort of medieval type of thinking, which might explain the popularity of fantasy novels, and things in which a castle could really defend you. It really was the premier mechanism of defense against assault, against physical assault. But now it's almost just like a metaphor for defending yourself against the things that are attacking.
Well, I have to agree with you. It sounds like a very powerful metaphor the more you talk about it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, do you want to revisit the other topics, or is that because I mean, it's really I really just want to get the your response to it, because it's very likely, you know, that what your response is other people will benefit from it too. So, but we don't have to.
Well, let's see. There were two parts to your talk. The first was your description of the relationship between introversion and extroversion and the way they're expressed in an individual's personality. and the second part was your link to Emerson and his ideas. And I would maybe hope that in your blog or in your writing, you could sort of develop those connections more clearly.
Okay.
But as I said, listening to you talk about these things, I can certainly follow the thread. And I hope maybe in the future, in your writing, you can add more clarity to these connections.
Yeah, it is actually a huge topic, even though when I'm talking about it, I feel like I've got everything under control, But there's definitely going to be gaps in my argumentation and the fleshed out, the degree to which everything's fleshed out. I think I should add. I'll add this one thing, that the 20th century, in the 1920s, when Carl Jung comes out with his book Psychological Types, I think you might be able to say that it is the period in history in which these philosophies before, they were just strongly argued philosophies by men. I'm a man and I'm going to argue my side and I'm going to insist on it. But with Jung's theory of psychological types, we're no longer in a world where, my attitude is the right one. What psychological types are they're kind of like saying, these are the natural philosophical and psychological standpoints that exist in the human species. And instead of saying one's right, like materialism is the right one, the data of the senses is more important than the ideas, or the ideas are more important than the senses, it's as if we had so many wars and so much chaos that it's no longer a joking matter, or you can no longer just be a philosopher who's a materialist or a philosopher who's an idealist, because what you now need is to really acknowledge that some of these attitudes, they're like natural born temperaments in people. And so Jung is adding this thing that says your philosophical attitude is the result of your natural born temperament. And Emerson's not, he's getting closer to that. But it's as if the 20th century, to me, was a change. It marked a change. Because now it's about understanding other people. It's like, I'm not just going to assert that I'm right anymore. I need to step back and really say, wait, if I'm humble, I admit that I don't understand that other person. I don't understand why that person behaves the way they do. And Carl Jung I think Psychological Types, it's like a platform for, instead of just wanting to argue, It's like when you were arguing and it didn't work, and you're desperate to know why, So it's like adding a more richly layered way of approaching people and the reasons they do things.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thanks for joining us. I don't even know what the next topic will be, but we'll see you then.